Hey guys, this time around, a kitchen utility type knife for the wife. Tomorrow's Mother's Day, and that'll be a good gift. Thanks for hanging out, guys. Really appreciate it, and hope you enjoy this one. Thanks. Alright, guys, here we go. We have some wrought iron chain, and we have a piece of O1 tool steel. We get the forge fired up so we can warm it up while we're prepping these pieces. So what we're going to do is take one link out of one of these chains. These chains are wrought iron, and they were used for the logging industry to make log booms here in the Northwest. And they're fairly plentiful. Finding them in wrought iron is a trick, and I've found several of them recently. They got a real good grain look to them, and they're pretty well refined. Doing the job they did, they would have to be a little higher quality. Alright, this is the O1 tool steel, and we're going to forge this thing down to about 1/4 of an inch thick. And the same with the two pieces of wrought iron chain that we have. We get these guys straightened out, and we get them all forged down. So the trick here is, and it's rather an experiment, is to weld the wrought iron to the O1. I'm sure a lot of people have done it. I have never, and curious about it because O1 apparently doesn't like high temperatures sustained too long, and of course wrought iron needs to be worked near welding temperature. So we're going to see how this works. It's a pretty good experiment for me. Good practice. I have not used a lot of O1 tool steel in a lot of things. So, alright, so the surface grinder here, we're going to grind the wrought iron, all sides of it, except for the edges, and we got both of them back on the magnet there to even them out, so we end up with an equal thickness of wrought iron on either side of our O1 tool steel. And you notice there wasn't a lot of sparks coming off that, and with this tool steel that changes quite a bit. That stuff sparks really well. Alright, so we're going to cut the sort of the ragged ends off of this wrought iron, so we end up with some nice even pieces. And there's our billet. We need to get this guy welded up, get a handle welded on him. And we've got way more material here than what we need, so we're going to end up with a piece that we're going to do an inspection on here in just a bit. There we go. Now we've got the wrought iron on the outside, which likes the heat. We've got the O1. From what I read, it doesn't like the heat too much. It likes to be forged between 18 and 1600 degrees. But we're going to push it a little bit. And from what I understand, what I've read, is that you take a chance on making it a little brittle and cracking it. But here is our initial forge weld. And it seemed to weld up really well the first time around, so. But I'm going to sort of push it to its limit. We're going to give it a second weld here, and we're going to go right over to the press, where we're going to press it down to 3/8 of an inch from the get-go. And the reason I wanted to do this is those imprints that the press die is putting in there. I'm hoping that those will press deeper into the O1 in those areas and give me sort of a, what I'll call a thumbprint type pattern going up that steel. Okay, so after we pressed it out, I cut about a 6-inch piece off the end of this. We're not going to need that much for the knife. And you can see the laminations here. And this is right off the press. And there is some cracking on this side. So we flip it over, and it cracked quite a bit on this side. And I think it's because I was pressing it so quickly and I took it down all in one shot, and it was pretty hot. So hopefully those cracks don't go all the way into that billet. They don't seem to on the end, but hard saying. We'll use that crack side as the spine of the knife and grind them out and see how far they go, see what kind of a knife we have left. Okay, so I did not grind any of the cracks out of the edges of this. I've got it up to welding temperature at the moment, and we're simply shaping the billet into a flat piece. And I went ahead and used an abrasive saw and cut the tip at an angle. And the flat edge of this blade is going to be the cutting edge. And what I'm doing here is a typical progression. So form the tip, and I'm using the cross peen of my 2.5 pound hammer to spread that blade out a little bit. And then I'll go back to the Alex Steel 3.5 pound rounding hammer to get rid of those peen marks, and it'll help spread the blade a little bit more. And we're going to start isolating our tang, that large hammer. And then we'll go back to our little 2.5 pounder to do the finish forging on this. And we're pretty much going to forge it to shape and leave enough to finish it off on the grinder. Okay, so as I'm finishing this up on the blade end, you'll notice that I'm letting it cool to a little cooler temperature and working it to help smoothen and plenish a blade. It gets rid of a little excess scale that way as well. And the steel doesn't seem to mind at the moment. It's not cracking, the wrought iron's not splitting. At least there's nothing obvious. I'm sure all that'll show up later. And we're going to cut this thing off a little bit much. We're going to taper this thing down. I like forging much more than I like grinding, so the closer I can get it here, the happier I'll be. And this thing's starting to look a little bit like a knife. Alright. Give it a little scrub up there. Straighten everything out here one last time. And we'll get it over to the surface grinder and take some of this stuff off the side so we can go grind a profile into it. And you're seeing a few sparks, but not too many. The outside of this thing is covered in wrought iron. Alright. So as far as the profile of this thing goes, I'm going to grind on the spine until I do not see any more cracks. And there are a few cracks in it that I can see. Looks like several of them forge welded together while we were cleaning up the billet after the press. But there are quite a few there. And where I cut the tip at an angle to forge that drop area in, there don't seem to be any cracks at all, so I don't believe any cracks go through the billet. And there you go. The 2x72 decided to beat the snot out of me. But we threw a new belt on it and just kept going. It scared me a little bit, I'll be honest. But we're getting these bevels, so what I'm going to do is just do some sort of initial bevels before we get this thing into the quench tank, because I hear, so they say, it's easier to remove that metal when it's soft. Okay, this is my ammo can full of peanut oil, and I'm just doing the edge and letting the spine cool down a little bit before we go all the way in. And we got a file on this this thing and see how much luck we had. I'm reading about the tool steel, slightly above magnetic, oil quench, and it's supposed to work pretty well, so they say. We'll find out. Alright, we're going into an oven. You can see a little warp right down the blade there. We're going to clamp it to this. It's a piece of high-speed steel that I use on the mill for lining things up. And we're at about 400 degrees Fahrenheit, and we're in there for an hour. And I only did that once. And the blade seems to be fairly straight, so this is a grinder. And we have plenty of material to take off, clean up. So we went through several different belts, taking this thing down to, eventually we got down to a worn out 800 grit, so it's probably around 1,000 grit on the belts. And then we went over to start hand sanding. When I started out with a pretty heavy grit here, I could have started out with something much lighter. I think this was probably an 80 grit. And what I discovered as I got into the lighter ones, you can't see it, so I'm not even going to slow it down and try to show you, but there was a crack, and I ended up grinding off about a 1/16 of an inch off the edge of this blade. 3/32. Alright, let's see what this thing looks like. I'm kind of anxious about this. Before we get a handle on it here. I like it. That's awesome. Dry it off a little bit, see what it looks like. That's going to make a beautiful blade. Alright, so this is our handle wood. It's a burl. I'm not sure what kind of a burl, but it's going in the vacuum chamber. Little cactus juice, and we are going to vacuum this thing for several hours and stabilize this. Because it is going to be in the kitchen, it's going to be in a dishwasher, it's going to be, well, I don't know if it'll be in a dishwasher or not, but there's a chance it could end up in there. We want this thing sealed up as best as possible. To anything coming apart. So while that thing is stabilizing or vacuuming, went ahead and built a little sort of a bolster, I guess. It's not going to be a guard. It's going to be a plate on the end of the handle. And this is a Stuart Smith trick. Ball peen around that hole, and it closes it down a little bit. You can get a real nice fit up to your blade. I'm going to leave some of the peen marks on the blade side, dress them up a little bit, and our tang is a little bit long, so we're going to take some of that off. Alright, put some grinder hash marks in that tang, and what I'm going to do here is I'm going to solder this little brass bolster plate on in an attempt to keep the any liquid or anything out, and so that it won't get in behind the handle there. And I've soldered these things on before. The little clip there will just keep it from sliding down the blade. I heat up the tang in the clip, and then we'll run the solder around the sides. Now this is a silver bearing solder. It's got 11% silver in it, so they say. So it's a little harder, and it melts at about 450 degrees. So it kept the blade cool. It didn't change any colors, so I think it's okay. Still skates a file, so. Alright, this is our stabilized wood into the oven. 275 degrees. 2 hours. So before this went in, I drilled a hole through the end of the block before it went into the cactus juice, so it would get some of that stabilizer on the inside. And when it came out, I simply rat tail file and open it up so that this tang would fit. We got 15-minute epoxy. We'll leave it for a couple of hours and let it cure really well before we do anything else to this. There we go. We'll be back. All right, you ready to go? So we'll just take this thing all the way down, and I'm going to use the belt grinder to do that. And in the midst of this, you see that spot that's in the red circle? Yeah, ground all the way through into where the drill bit was. So I went ahead and finished the shape on the handle, and then I went ahead and ground the backside off, the backside of the handle, from one end to the other, from the bolster all the way back, and I made it as flat as I possibly could. Took it all the way down to the tang. And the reason that I did that is because I'm going to glue a piece of contrasting wood to that. It'll be a bit of an experiment because I've not laminated a handle together this way. Usually these stacked handles, you know, the tang goes through them and there's a, you know, some way to connect them together. But this is stacked in line with the tang, and I'm curious as to how this will work out. And since it's going to be here in-house, I'll be able to keep an eye on it, see how it works as a kitchen knife, and if need be I can replace the handle. But you know, we're gonna kind of make lemonade out of some lemons here. All right, so I'm gonna hog this thing off, and my kid tells me that this knife is cursed because, well, that would be not the first time that that happened during the construction of this knife. Brand new belts. So I'm not sure what it is. So we finished up shaping the knife, and I put the handle right back into the stabilizer because that new piece of wood was not stabilized. I wanted to try to seal things up. Now I've got glue on this thing, and I'm putting it into an oven, 275 degrees. We left it in for an hour, and it seemed to work out okay. It's a little hot, and I tested the blade, and it seemed to be just fine. Now I'm a little off camera here, but just an explanation as to what I did is I used a fine belt, a worn out belt, very slack on the belt grinder, and finished the handle off that way, and it came out very smooth. Oil it up, and I like the way it looks. I really do. And that blade came out beautifully. We'll get some oil all over this thing, and I've got to sharpen it here. Let's see if it holds an edge. I actually really like the way that came out. So it was a mistake that worked out. So I got the oil wiped off, and not too bad. Not too bad at all. So we'll sharpen it up and get it cleaned up and give it to the wife. She'll give you a little demonstration as to how it works. I give it a little leather strop. While I was doing this, for some reason I couldn't help but think of Bugs Bunny. I'm not sure why that is, but anyway. There we go. Seems to work pretty well. All right, I'm going to give this thing to the wife, and you guys can watch her work some of her magic with it.